What started as a normal conversation suddenly took a sharp and uncomfortable turn on live daytime television. What happens when a routine conversation on live television takes an unexpected turn and a guest calmly pushes back in a way no one fully anticipated? Make sure to subscribe to Prime Voice and like and comment for more real talk show coverage. The segment begins the way many daytime talk show conversations do, with relaxed energy and polite back and forth. Keanu Reeves walks onto the set to warm applause, offering a modest wave to the studio audience before taking his seat at the table. His demeanor is exactly what viewers expect: reserved, respectful, and quietly attentive. The hosts welcome him, exchange a few light remarks about his recent projects, and briefly touch on his long-standing reputation for humility and professionalism. There's laughter, nodding, and the kind of easy rhythm that signals a familiar and comfortable interview format. As the conversation settles, the discussion gradually shifts toward broader themes that often come up when a high-profile guest like Reeves is on the show. The panel begins talking about fame, public expectations, and how celebrities are often asked to use their platforms to speak on social and cultural issues. Keanu listens closely, leaning slightly forward, hands folded, maintaining eye contact with whoever is speaking. He nods occasionally, signaling engagement without interrupting. Joy Behar introduces a question that moves the tone just slightly away from light promotion and into opinion-based discussion. She frames it as a general observation, referencing how public figures are increasingly expected to comment on political and social topics, whether they feel prepared to or not. Her tone is conversational but pointed, as it often is when she feels strongly about an issue. The other hosts look on attentively, some nodding in agreement, others waiting to see how Reeves will respond. Keanu answers carefully at first, choosing his words with visible thought. He speaks about personal responsibility and the idea that not every individual, famous or not, has the same comfort level engaging publicly on every issue. His voice is calm and measured, and the audience remains quiet, listening closely. There's nothing confrontational in his response, and the exchange still feels balanced and respectful. Joy follows up almost immediately, gently challenging his point. She suggests that when someone has a massive platform, staying neutral can sometimes be interpreted as avoiding responsibility. Her phrasing isn't aggressive, but there's a clear position behind it. The studio audience reacts softly, with a few murmurs and light applause, signaling that the topic has struck a chord. Keanu doesn't respond right away. He pauses, briefly glancing down before looking back up at the table. That pause alone subtly shifts the energy in the room. It's not uncomfortable, but it signals that he's considering how to respond rather than offering a rehearsed answer. When he speaks again, he clarifies that his perspective isn't about avoiding issues, but about respecting the complexity of them. He explains that speaking publicly carries weight, and that he believes responsibility includes knowing when to listen rather than speak. At this point, the disagreement becomes more defined, though still understated. Joy leans in slightly, her posture more engaged, and counters that silence from influential figures can feel discouraging to people who are directly affected by the issues being discussed. Her tone remains controlled, but there's a firmness that suggests she strongly disagrees. One of the other hosts briefly interjects, attempting to broaden the discussion by acknowledging both viewpoints, but the focus quickly returns to Joy and Keanu. The camera cuts between close-ups of their faces, a typical live production choice that subtly emphasizes the exchange without overtly framing it as conflict. Keanu maintains steady eye contact, his expression neutral but attentive. He doesn't raise his voice or gesture emphatically. Instead, he reiterates his belief that authenticity matters more than obligation, and that speaking without full understanding can sometimes do more harm than good. The audience responds with a mix of reactions this time. There's scattered applause, a few audible nods of agreement, and some quiet tension in the room. It's clear that viewers in the studio are divided, which is often the case when discussions move into personal values rather than clear facts. The hosts around the table remain composed, though their body language reflects awareness that the conversation has shifted into more sensitive territory. Joy presses again, this time reframing her point. She emphasizes the difference between perfection and participation, suggesting that even imperfect engagement can be meaningful. Her voice is steady, but there's a slight edge that indicates she feels the need to clarify her stance. Keanu listens without interrupting, his posture unchanged, signaling respect even in disagreement. When he responds, Keanu makes it clear that he understands her perspective, but he gently disagrees with the expectation itself. He explains that he believes people contribute in different ways, some publicly and some privately, and that neither approach should be automatically judged. His delivery is even and thoughtful, and he avoids framing his point as a rebuttal to Joy personally. Instead, he keeps the focus on the broader idea. The hosts briefly exchange glances, a common on-air reaction when a conversation becomes more nuanced than expected. One host attempts to lighten the mood with a brief comment about how refreshing it is to hear different perspectives expressed calmly. The audience lets out a small laugh, easing the tension just slightly, but the core disagreement remains present. As the segment continues, it's clear that this isn't an argument in the traditional sense. There are no raised voices, no interruptions that spiral out of control. Instead, it's a genuine clash of viewpoints, unfolding in real time, with both sides standing firm while remaining respectful. The pacing of the conversation slows, allowing each response to land fully before the next question is asked. By the end of this portion of the discussion, the tone has shifted from casual promotion to something more reflective. Keanu sits back slightly, hands still folded, while Joy nods, acknowledging his explanation even if she doesn't fully agree. The audience remains attentive, sensing that the conversation is still developing and that the most defining moments may yet come. As the show prepares to move into the next part of the discussion, there's a clear sense that what began as a routine interview has turned into a thoughtful, live exchange that neither side expected to have in quite this way. And as the cameras stay rolling, it's evident that the conversation is far from over. As the conversation continues, the hosts subtly guide the discussion forward, aware that the exchange has captured the audience's attention. The energy at the table is noticeably different now. What had been relaxed and promotional has settled into something more deliberate. Keanu remains composed, his posture steady, while Joy sits slightly angled toward him, signaling that she's still engaged and not ready to move on just yet. One of the co-hosts attempts to broaden the lens, asking Keanu how he personally decides when to speak publicly and when to stay quiet. It's framed as a neutral question, giving him space to explain without directly pushing back against Joy's position. Keanu responds thoughtfully, explaining that for him, the decision often comes down to whether he feels he can add clarity rather than noise. He mentions that he prefers conversations where listening plays as big a role as speaking, especially when topics are complex or emotionally charged. The studio audience listens quietly, with only the occasional soft murmur of agreement. The camera briefly cuts to Joy, who nods along but maintains a focused expression. When Keanu finishes, she responds by acknowledging his point, but adds that television, especially live daytime television, is already a space built around conversation rather than perfection. She suggests that waiting for the right moment or the right words can sometimes mean missing opportunities to support people who are watching and looking for reassurance. Her tone remains conversational, but there's a clear sense of conviction. She gestures lightly with her hand as she speaks, emphasizing key phrases without appearing confrontational. Keanu watches her closely, not interrupting, his expression neutral but attentive. The exchange feels balanced, like a real-time negotiation of ideas rather than a debate meant to produce a winner. Keanu responds by clarifying that his hesitation isn't rooted in fear of making mistakes, but in respect for the audience. He explains that viewers deserve honesty, not rushed opinions shaped by the pressure of the moment. He points out that sometimes choosing to learn privately before speaking publicly can be a form of responsibility in itself. His delivery is calm, and he avoids framing his words as a rebuttal to Joy personally, keeping the focus on principles rather than personalities. At the table, the other hosts shift slightly in their seats. One nods thoughtfully, another glances toward the audience, sensing their mixed reactions. The studio audience responds with a blend of light applause and silence, reflecting the divided nature of the discussion. It's the kind of reaction that signals engagement rather than discomfort. Joy leans back briefly, then forward again, signaling that she's processing his response. She says she understands the value of careful thought, but reiterates that visibility matters, especially on platforms like daytime television where conversations reach a wide and diverse audience. She emphasizes that viewers often connect more with sincerity than certainty, and that acknowledging uncertainty can itself be powerful. The pace of the conversation slows further. There's less overlap in speech now, fewer quick interjections. Each person seems aware that the discussion has taken on weight, and they're allowing space for responses to land. Keanu nods as Joy speaks, signaling that he's hearing her, even if he doesn't fully agree. When he replies, he makes a point of emphasizing common ground. He agrees that sincerity is important and that public conversations can have real impact. Where he differs, he explains, is in the expectation that impact must always come through commentary. He notes that action, support behind the scenes, and personal choices also shape influence, even if they're less visible. The audience reacts more audibly this time, with a wave of soft applause. The camera briefly pans across the crowd, capturing attentive faces and subtle nods. Back at the table, one of the hosts offers a short comment about how rare it is to see disagreement handled so calmly on live television. The remark draws a small laugh, easing the tension without dismissing the seriousness of the topic. Joy smiles slightly at the comment, then returns to Keanu, acknowledging that their disagreement isn't about intent but about approach. She says that while she still believes public voices carry a certain obligation, she respects that his perspective comes from a place of thoughtfulness rather than avoidance. Her tone softens just enough to signal that the exchange is moving toward mutual understanding, even without full agreement. Keanu responds with a brief acknowledgement, thanking her for the conversation and reiterating that he values dialogue, especially when it challenges his own thinking. His body language remains relaxed, shoulders down, hands loosely folded. There's no sense of defensiveness, only steady engagement. As the hosts begin to steer the conversation toward the next segment, the atmosphere in the studio feels reflective rather than tense. The disagreement hasn't been resolved, but it's been explored openly, in a way that feels authentic to live daytime television. The audience offers a round of applause, not loud or dramatic, but appreciative. The cameras pull back slightly, signaling a transition, but the weight of the exchange lingers. What began as a simple interview has now become a moment viewers are likely to remember, not because of raised voices or sharp words, but because of the calm, real-time clash of perspectives that unfolded in front of them. And as the show moves forward, it's clear that this conversation has left an impression that will continue to resonate well beyond the studio. As the show continues, the hosts return from the brief transition with a noticeably more measured tone. The earlier exchange has set a reflective mood at the table, and everyone seems aware that the audience is still thinking about what was just said. Keanu remains seated in the same composed posture, his attention fully on the conversation, while Joy adjusts slightly in her chair, signaling that she's ready to continue but with a more thoughtful approach. One of the co-hosts brings the discussion back by referencing viewer perspectives, noting that many people watching at home often look to public figures for reassurance during uncertain times. The comment isn't framed as a challenge, but it naturally reopens the central theme of the earlier disagreement. Keanu nods, acknowledging the point, and prepares to respond. He speaks about empathy and connection, explaining that he believes reassurance can come in many forms. Sometimes it's through words spoken on a talk show, and other times it's through consistency in behavior and choices over time. His voice remains steady, and he emphasizes that his intention has never been to distance himself from people's concerns, but to engage in a way that feels honest to him. Joy listens carefully, her expression more neutral now than earlier. When she responds, she reframes the issue slightly, focusing less on obligation and more on opportunity. She suggests that moments like live television discussions offer a chance to reach people who might not otherwise feel heard. Her tone is less insistent than before, but the core of her argument remains clear. The audience reacts with quiet attention. There's less applause now and more stillness, indicating that viewers are processing the conversation rather than reacting emotionally. The camera lingers on Keanu's face as he listens, capturing subtle changes in expression that suggest he's considering her point rather than preparing a rebuttal. When he responds, Keanu acknowledges that opportunity does play a role, but he gently reiterates that he believes meaningful engagement requires readiness. He explains that speaking simply because the platform exists can sometimes dilute the message, especially when topics are deeply personal or complex. His words are careful, avoiding absolutes, and his tone remains respectful. At the table, one host interjects briefly to highlight how rare it is to see such a patient exchange on live television. The comment isn't meant to end the discussion, but to recognize its tone. Joy smiles faintly, and Keanu nods in agreement. The audience lets out a small, appreciative reaction, easing the atmosphere again. The conversation then shifts slightly as another host asks Keanu how he navigates differing opinions in his own life. It's a natural extension of the discussion, moving from public platforms to personal interactions. Keanu responds by talking about listening first, especially when he disagrees. He says that understanding where someone is coming from doesn't always change his view, but it often deepens it. Joy picks up on that point, agreeing that listening is essential, but adds that speaking up can also be a form of listening when it invites others to respond. Her tone is now more reflective than challenging. The earlier tension has softened into something closer to mutual exploration. The studio audience responds with light applause, signaling approval of the direction the conversation has taken. The camera briefly captures the other hosts nodding, some leaning forward, others relaxing back into their seats. The pacing of the segment feels steady and intentional, with no sense of rushing to wrap things up. Keanu responds again, agreeing that dialogue requires both listening and speaking. He clarifies that his preference for restraint doesn't mean silence, but selectivity. He emphasizes that he wants his words to align with his understanding, and that sometimes that alignment takes time. His explanation is calm, almost conversational, as if he's speaking one-on-one rather than to a national audience. Joy acknowledges this with a nod, saying she can respect that distinction even if she personally approaches the situation differently. She admits that her own style leans toward immediate engagement, shaped by years of live television and debate. The admission brings a brief moment of levity, and the audience responds with a small laugh. The hosts briefly exchange comments about how different communication styles can coexist, especially in public spaces. It's a subtle way of contextualizing the disagreement without minimizing it. Keanu listens, occasionally nodding, while Joy remains engaged but relaxed. As the segment nears its end, the conversation feels less like a disagreement and more like a shared examination of values. The tension hasn't vanished entirely, but it has transformed into something more constructive. The audience remains attentive, and the atmosphere in the studio is calm and thoughtful. When the host signals that they'll be moving on shortly, there's a sense that the discussion has reached a natural pause. Not a resolution, but a moment of understanding. Keanu offers a brief closing thought, emphasizing respect for differing perspectives and the importance of approaching conversations with care. Joy responds with a final nod and a short comment acknowledging that while they may not fully agree, the exchange itself was worthwhile. The audience applauds again, a bit more warmly this time, recognizing the authenticity of the moment. As the cameras prepare to transition to the next segment, the impact of the conversation lingers. What viewers have just witnessed isn't a dramatic confrontation, but a realistic, live discussion where disagreement unfolded calmly and honestly, leaving space for reflection rather than division. As the show moves forward, the atmosphere at the table remains calm but reflective. The earlier exchange has clearly shaped the tone of the segment, and the hosts appear more deliberate in how they frame their questions. Keanu sits comfortably, shoulders relaxed, while Joy maintains an open posture, signaling that although the disagreement isn't fully resolved, it's no longer tense. One of the co-hosts gently transitions the conversation by connecting the discussion to Keanu's career, noting that many of his film roles explore themes of responsibility, choice, and consequence. It's a natural pivot, but it still ties back to the ideas that sparked the earlier disagreement. Keanu responds thoughtfully, explaining that those themes resonate with him personally, not because they offer clear answers, but because they invite reflection. Joy listens closely, then comments that storytelling itself can be a powerful way to engage with social questions. She suggests that even when actors choose not to speak directly on certain issues, the stories they help tell can still influence how people think and feel. Her tone is noticeably less argumentative now, more observational. Keanu agrees with this point, saying that he believes art can create space for conversation without prescribing conclusions. He explains that he's often drawn to projects that encourage viewers to think rather than tell them what to think. The audience responds with a soft round of applause, appreciating the shift toward common ground. The hosts briefly exchange reactions, with one noting how the conversation has evolved from disagreement into exploration. Another adds that these kinds of discussions are what daytime television is meant to offer. Different perspectives shared in real time. The comment earns a few nods from the audience and helps contextualize the earlier tension. Joy then reflects on the earlier exchange more directly, acknowledging that her initial point came from concern about visibility and representation. She explains that when she pushes guests on these topics, it's often because she's thinking about viewers who may feel unseen. Her tone is candid but measured, and the studio remains quiet as she speaks. Keanu responds with equal openness, saying that he understands that motivation and respects it. He reiterates that his own approach comes from a desire to avoid oversimplifying issues that deserve nuance. He emphasizes that disagreement doesn't have to signal opposition, but can instead reflect different paths towards similar goals. The audience reacts with a noticeable wave of applause, louder than before but still controlled. It's the kind of response that signals appreciation for clarity and mutual respect rather than excitement. The camera briefly pans across the crowd, capturing attentive faces and thoughtful expressions. One of the hosts steps in to summarize the moment, noting that what viewers are seeing is a real-time example of how people can disagree without dismissing one another. The comment feels intentional, almost instructional, but it aligns naturally with the flow of the conversation. Joy nods, and Keanu offers a small smile. As the discussion continues, the pacing remains unhurried. There are no interruptions or overlapping voices now. Each person waits for the other to finish before responding, reinforcing the sense that the exchange has moved into a more reflective phase. Keanu adds that conversations like this remind him why live television can be valuable, even when it's uncomfortable. He says that being challenged respectfully can sharpen understanding, and that he doesn't view the earlier disagreement as negative. Joy agrees, saying that moments of tension often lead to the most meaningful dialogue. The audience responds with another round of light applause. The studio feels settled, as though the earlier tension has been absorbed and transformed into something constructive. The hosts glance toward the clock, aware that the segment is approaching its conclusion. As they prepare to transition, Joy offers a final thought, saying that while she still believes strongly in public engagement, she appreciates hearing why others approach it differently. Her tone is warm, signaling closure rather than continued debate. Keanu thanks her for the conversation, expressing appreciation for the chance to talk openly on a live platform. His delivery remains calm and sincere, consistent with how he's carried himself throughout the segment. The cameras slowly pull back, capturing the full table as the hosts begin to wrap up. The exchange, which began as a subtle disagreement, now feels like a complete arc, a moment of tension, followed by exploration, and ending in mutual acknowledgement. The audience applauds once more, and the show moves toward its final moments with a sense of balance and resolution. As the segment comes to a close, the hosts begin to guide the conversation toward its final moments. The tone in the studio is calm and composed, noticeably different from the subtle tension that marked the earlier part of the discussion. Keanu sits back slightly in his chair, his posture relaxed, while Joy turns toward the rest of the table, signaling that the exchange has reached its natural conclusion. One of the hosts thanks Keanu for joining the show and for engaging openly in the conversation. The acknowledgement feels genuine, and the audience responds with a warm round of applause. Keanu nods appreciatively, offering a brief smile toward the crowd before returning his attention to the hosts. Joy adds a short closing remark, saying that conversations like this are important, even when they don't end in full agreement. Her tone is friendly, and there's no lingering edge in her voice. As the cameras remain on the table, the audience applause continues for a few seconds longer than usual, reflecting appreciation not for drama, but for the honesty of the exchange. The hosts exchange quick glances and small nods, a common on-air signal that the segment landed as intended. The show then moves into its wrap-up, with the hosts previewing upcoming segments. Keanu is thanked once more as the camera briefly focuses on him, capturing a final wave to the audience. The moment feels settled and respectful, with no indication of unresolved tension. After the episode airs, the discussion quickly extends beyond the studio. Viewers begin sharing clips of the exchange online, focusing on the calm disagreement between Keanu and Joy rather than any single statement. Many comments highlight the measured tone of the conversation, noting how rare it is to see differing viewpoints discussed without raised voices or interruptions on live television. On social media, reactions are mixed but largely thoughtful. Some viewers side with Joy, agreeing that public figures have a responsibility to use their platforms to speak out. Others relate more to Keanu's perspective, expressing appreciation for his emphasis on restraint and careful engagement. A significant number of comments focus less on who was right and more on how the conversation was handled. In follow-up discussions, talk show commentators and media writers note that the segment stood out precisely because it avoided sensationalism. Rather than escalating into a headline-driven confrontation, the exchange unfolded in a way that felt authentic to daytime television. Several highlight how the hosts allowed the conversation to breathe, giving space for explanation instead of rushing to move on. In the days that follow, Joy briefly addresses the segment during another episode, clarifying that her intention was never to put Keanu on the spot, but to explore a broader idea about visibility and influence. She emphasizes that disagreement, when handled respectfully, can be productive. Her comments are met with nods from the panel and a supportive reaction from the audience. Keanu, for his part, doesn't make a separate public statement about the exchange. However, in a later interview promoting a different project, he references the value of thoughtful conversation, without mentioning the show directly. Viewers familiar with the earlier segment recognize the connection, interpreting it as a continuation of the same perspective he shared on air. Over time, the moment becomes less about the disagreement itself and more about what it represented. It's remembered as an example of how live television can still offer meaningful dialogue without leaning into conflict. For many viewers, the exchange reinforces the idea that disagreement doesn't have to be divisive to be impactful. As the conversation continues online, clips circulate with captions emphasizing calm discussion and mutual respect. Comments reflect appreciation for both viewpoints and for the way the show handled the moment live. The segment doesn't dominate headlines, but it leaves a lasting impression on those who watched it unfold in real time. And now, having seen how a routine daytime interview evolved into a thoughtful exchange of perspectives, we want to hear from you. Share your opinion in the comments and subscribe to Prime Voice for more narration-based talk show stories.